start constructing the phrases in your mind as if you're going to speak to a 5, 6, 7 year old in your native tongue.
Greetings, friends, one and all. Welcome to another episode of the Beyond Fluency podcast. I'm Liam.
And I'm Ramps.
So, Ramps, what were we chatting about today?
Oh man, today we spoke about the 3 C's of communication, which was great to talk about. We could have gone on for hours and hours. The
Sure.
3 C's are
Clear, concise, and consistent communication.
we looked at how we can apply this to language learning, as well as to how we can apply this to how we use language, not just from an oral point of view. We even touched on a little bit of how this applies to writing as well.
We also looked a bit deeper at the style of communication and developing your own style and how to do that from a linguistic and language point of view. It really gave me a lot to think about, actually, the way that we dissected the subject. And I think that you enjoy what we have to offer today. So why don't we just jump straight in?
I really enjoyed it doing the research on this one because there's so much information about this topic and specifically about the 3 C's of communication, which are clarity, conciseness, and consistency.
Okay.
Um,
Why don't we
which
start with
which
clarity then?
why don't we start with clarity? Yeah. So textbook definition of clarity. Would you like to give us that one there, or should I?
Don't do that to me.
Okay.
Don't ask me to give you a textbook definition. Is very rarely when you get a definition from me is it textbook.
But yeah. So basically, clarity is expressing your thoughts in a way that is easy to understand. So no ambiguity, no confusion, right?
Right.
That is the beginning point. Now, how I usually kind of bring this down to my clients is I say to them, know your audience and grade your language accordingly.
Yes, definitely.
What I mean by that is it's great for you to learn idiomatic expression, phrasal verbs, and all this kind of uh, phrases and words that add a little bit more nuance and shades to meaning, especially the people who we work with who are already at B2. This is
Right.
one of their desires, because they feel that that's what brings them to the next level and gets them closer to a native, being able to be a little bit more creative with the language, if you will.
Yes.
Um, so just know, just know your audience. Every time you're going to communicate with somebody in English, whether it's in written or spoken,
Hmm.
just be aware of the person's limitations. So if you've identified that this person is maybe a B1 level speaker of the language, and you know you're a B2 bordering on C1, why make their life more complicated by using terminology that makes you look good, because it does, but it
Hmm.
simultaneously makes you look a bit like a show off, which I don't think you you want that as well.
Right.
So yeah,
And I
that's how
think
I say clarity.
to add to that, check in with your audience. Don't just focus on what you're saying, focus on the response. There will be many non-verbal signals if someone is not understanding you. There's the wide-eyed, yeah, which is a fake smile, or the what is a very
Yeah.
common one. So make sure that you're not so focused on not making a mistake that you don't see that the people you're talking to aren't understanding what you're saying.
So
And
it
use
in
and use language for clarification. You know, we're talking about
exactly.
clarity. Use language for clarification. Are you following what I'm saying? Would you like me to clarify anything? These kind of phrases are opportunities for you to check in with your audience to make sure that they are still on the same page.
And to add to that, to clarity, as we're still on clarity, from a language point of view, how we then actually try to communicate clearly is firstly using simple sentence structures.
Mhm.
One of the big differences, again, between Latin-based languages and English is this one sentence thing. As a rule, especially with written language in English, one sentence, one main idea. So when you write in your email, every sentence should serve to just communicate one clear thing. The second sentence, the second clear thing, and so on. And bringing that over into your speaking as well. use simpler structures to start with, and then you can build onto the complexity, but get the simple structures correct
Mhm.
and strong. The second part with clarity is obviously pronunciation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And not just pronunciation, enunciation. It's articulation, it's pronunciation and enunciation. So take your time to get your mouth around the words properly, and people will understand you better.
So that what Liam just described now is paying equal attention to the sound, pronunciation, but simultaneously pay attention to the movement of your mouth, how your mouth is moving to create those sounds, enunciation.
Super
Yeah.
important. You'll notice when, if you listen to Ramps or I, when we're speaking to lower level students, we simplify our language, yes. But really, what we do better than anything else is we make sure that every word is said completely in a slow way where our mouth is moving slightly more exaggerated than if we were talking to each other like this. And that's the difference.
Because
It's not always the language, but it's the way that the sounds are produced that make a big difference.
because in the beginning stages of learning a language, the dead space, the silence in between words is important
Mm,
because that's how the person knows, okay, that word has ended. And because it's right at the beginning of learning a language, especially when talking about learning a language as an adult, it's the words that people use to identify meaning. And they
hmm
look for familiar words. So allowing for that dead space in between is giving them a bit of time to do a quick mental analysis of, oh, have I heard this before? Okay, yes, I have. I can move on to the next word. And
Yeah.
they're almost doing this in real time as you're speaking. I mean, some clients, especially the lower level ones, like A2, have gone on to say to me during our session that, Ramps, every time I see you, everything that you say to me, I understand, but I only understand because I literally, as you are speaking, are translating word for word what you are saying. So you can see how and why pace at which people speak is often one of the first things people mention when
hmm
they talk about people they have a difficult time understanding,
Mm.
right? Hello, remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Now, let's get back to the episode. But I think you're right about enunciation. I'm trying to use that a lot more in my sessions. And
Yeah.
sometimes people feel a bit uncomfortable, right? Because then I have to sort of like, okay, look at my mouth, look how my tongue is moving. So, for example, the TH, the voice and unvoiced TH.
Yes,
We're keeping that in. I'm
I
definitely
agree.
keeping that in. I think your microphone got momentarily disconnected because I hear a bit
It
of an
should be
echo.
back on now, right?
Now we're back on. Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
I got so
enunciation is
excited.
important. Yeah, clearly, right? And
Yeah.
this comes back to something we've often said is look in the dictionary. Because if you look in the dictionary, you can actually no. Google. There is a platform that actually shows you the mouth, the movement of the mouth in just to double down on the enunciation. I might
Mhm.
have to think about it. Maybe we'll add it into the comment section ourselves at
I
a later
think I think
stage.
that's a good idea. Yeah, we'll put a link to something that is clear in terms of the mouth positions and the sounds that you're making. This is something that I noticed that Latin speakers struggle with,
You mean
especially Spanish.
Latin-based language speakers?
Yes.
Latin speakers are very few.
All right, Mr.
Well, we are. This
All
is
right,
our
Mr.
job, right? We should be. People are
Latin-based
listening.
language speakers. Yes, exactly.
Thank
Particularly
you.
Spanish, I noticed when I was working in the UK last summer. I spent a lot of time with a multinational class, and I think part of enunciation is also rhythm, it's prosody,
Yes.
right? And so if you're applying the rhythm of your language to speaking English at B2 level or higher, then it affects other people's ability to understand what you're saying because you're fitting English words into the rhythm of your native language. And as we know with Spanish and Italian, for example, this can be a kind of rhythm. We don't work that way in English. We had a rhythm to it, but it's emphasizing the important words, not every single syllable.
I think I would add French to that list of the languages that have a very clear, distinct rhythm. Just to give you a sense of exactly what Liam is saying, in case it's a bit unclear, I feel personally, anyway, that the French are very easy to understand this using the French accent because it doesn't matter how well, generally speaking, a French speaker could speak a language. That always appears to be the sort of the last frontier to conquer. And so you'll find someone who speaks the language very well English, this French speaker, but this they speak English in a very much a French rhythm. Even though if the pronunciation is very good, the th is usually a bit of a problem, but it is a bit something like this because Latin languages tend to be up down, up down, up down, sort of like a
Mhm.
wave going up and down, whereas English is a bit more like this, where the words seem like they're melting one into the other, and only the word that I want you to focus on is said with a particular stress note or so
Mhm.
on.
Yeah.
And that's yeah, that's just the thing with the Latin-based languages. That remains as one of the last things to conquer for them.
What I'd like to add to that is if you haven't watched our previous episode on creativity yet, we'll leave a link for that up in the card above. Uh, we were talking about creatively building your language, and something that is very common with native speakers who have a good level of language and a wide vocabulary is we are able to change the way we stress in a sentence to change the intention, change the emotion of what we're saying,
Yes, yes.
right?
Yeah,
So we'll
yeah.
we'll take unimportant words, but put the intention on that unimportant word to make it sound important, to give it a different style, a different focus. And you see this a lot, especially with actors and with different speakers. I'll leave a link in the description below to a fantastic video full of very famous British actors doing the classic line from Hamlet: "To be or not to be? That is the question." And each of the actors comes on and says the line slightly differently by emphasizing a different word, and it changes the meaning of the sentence every time. And that's why the rhythm of English is different, is because you have the ability to do that. Whereas with Latin based languages and other language which have this very distinct rhythm to them,
That you have to adhere to almost when you
that you
speak the
have to
language.
adhere to when you
Mm.
speak, right? There's no flexibility in that sense. Whereas English, you can go a bit, you can
Can
change
play.
based on what your intention is.
A very simple example of exact what you're speaking about is how we use do in the affirmative precisely to highlight the word that comes after do, not do itself. For
Hmm.
example, I do like ice cream. I'm putting the emphasis on the word do, but the emphasis is how much I love ice cream. It's
Mm,
probably more close to I love ice cream without actually saying the word I love ice cream, right?
yeah. Oh, I do love ice cream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Emphasis, even though it's on do, is highlighting what comes after do. It's a
Yeah.
nice little creative device. So
Yeah.
clarity is important even in
And
our approach in learning the language. Just
mhm.
declutter it yourself.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. And something to add to that, I think, in terms of clarity, know what your main point is. What are you trying to say? And focus on that. Don't get distracted by trying to explain other things.
The
Focus on
details.
your main point
Yeah.
and stick with it. Don't deviate. especially if you're trying to improve communication in for or business related language in meetings, presentations, whatever it is. This comes down to preparation more than anything. Identifying the main point and sticking to the main point, not being distracted by other opportunities. For example, saying, "Oh yeah, today we're going to talk about clear and concise communication." Communication is a funny subject. We could talk about how people communicate on the telephone, and then the telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell, who was an inventor a long time ago. And in the period of time that he invented things, communication was really, where are you going with this, right? Well, how is that clear and
But
concise?
but here's the thing. If again, it depends on the language you're speaking, because in another language, going on to that amount of detail before getting to the point is very much appreciated, right? Um, yeah. In other languages, and I won't be specific which, but in other languages, that amount of detail is essential
Yeah.
in knowing and carrying on with the situation. But this comes to mind when you said don't get bogged down by the details. Is rule number 8 on 10 ways to have a better conversation. She says stay out of the weeds, right?
Okay,
So
right.
the details, and it's perfect. It's perfect. Staying out of the weeds is a good place to be at
Mm.
because you get to the point, right?
Question of the day, folks. Which of the three C's is the one that you struggle most with? Leave a comment in the box below. Give us your thoughts, and we will share any tips that we can to help you.
I don't know if there's anything else I could add in terms of clarity apart from simple sentences, pronunciation, and
I,
enunciation.
I
Um,
have I have something to add to clarity. Something that gives clarity to your thoughts is organization, writing what you want to say down, even if it's in bullet point form. Having gone through the process of writing that out, it gets your brain to think logically about what's going to come next
you
through
know,
what you're saying. So this is
initially,
preparation, organization.
initially I was against that because I had a client who was so terrified of having to converse in English that she wanted us to role play the potential conversations she's going to have with a client, or potential prospect client. And I did it reluctantly, but it actually worked for her because it took away the element of surprise. So we sat, and that's what we did. And I try to think of played a different character all the time, being a client who's being aloof, a client who's being overly excited, a client who's being a little bit rude,
Hmm.
and all particularly the situations that would be difficult for her to deal with in general, and then added the fact that you'd have to do it in a language that is not her own. It's
Hmm.
another layer of difficulty. So it wasn't so much a language issue per se, but a, a issue to deal with, a question and a language afterwards. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It actually works,
yeah.
preparing them for that.
I'm not saying you should be reading from a script. In fact, I am very much against having scripted answers because the moment you come to a situation where the response isn't what you expected, the tendency is to freeze and not know how to move forward, which is not a pleasant experience. What I do say is have bullet points that you want to move through. The preparation is I have the information based on those bullet points so that when you come to presenting, if you miss something, it's okay because you just keep going. The flow is still there. And it
What
doesn't
about
matter if
conversation?
what about conversation
Because yeah, that I 100% agree with you with the bullet points, and I think we touched on it as well when we were looking at
when we did
presentations,
presentations. Yeah.
when we did presentations, yeah. But what about conversation? What about someone who's terrified of conversation? And part of it is that one, yes, the language element, but also that I don't know where it's gonna go,
Hmm.
which is we get a lot of that, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
perfectly happy talking about business, but as soon as the conversation goes beyond business, I find that I have limitations. And sometimes this is coming from like a B2C1, someone that you, as someone who works with them, wouldn't even occur to you that they may have difficulties in just conversing outside work related topics.
Yeah.
Can this work as well?
I think
Yeah.
you can prepare yourself for small talk. There are some go to go to subjects with small talk that are easy to get into. You can use them with pretty much anybody, and you can have fixed questions or language around that subject that is easy to remember, right? So let's take holidays, for example. Okay, destination, dream destinations. Where would you like to go in the future, right? This is all very simple way of getting into a conversation. And if you spend 5 or 10 minutes in that space with someone else, you're going to relax into the conversation. And then those initial problems of
Yeah.
insecurity, they will go away because you're starting to build rapport with the other person. So it's about, having starting points is
Mm.
fantastic. So if I know I'm meeting someone for the first time, then here are three subject areas I can talk about. Here are three areas within that subject area. I've got 9 ways I can get to know somebody in a simple way. And then where the conversation goes from that will depend on the rapport that you build with the other person.
Also how much time you have at hand, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Assuming is it 10 minutes before the meeting or is it during 10 minutes while you're waiting for the rest of the group to wrap up and you're gonna go have lunch together, you know?
Right.
Um, so
Are you
no,
meeting someone at a conference for the first time? Right.
mm,
It depends on the situation, but there's always ways that you can pre-plan. Okay, I have a lot of I have confidence around this subject. I have language around this subject. So now I'm just going to be curious about the other person and ask them questions on that subject.
no.
And if
Yeah,
in doubt with responses, keep it simple. If there is ever a moment where you're worried about your knowledge on a subject, keep your responses simple because then
but
they will be
mm,
there will be clarity about what you're saying. You're As soon as you try and overcomplicate your language when you're talking about a subject that you're not confident about, that's when it's going to cause you problems.
I think here we're now bordering on clarity, but the simultaneously maybe we're more now talking about conciseness. Doing it this way, you avoid over explaining yourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Over explaining yourself, which brings me to the next point is being comfortable with the moment of silence. Because sometimes what
Yes.
happens is people over explain to try to fill those gaps of silence, which is quite normal when you're meeting someone for the first time or when rapport is still in the initial stages of being built. It's normal that you run out of things to say, you know?
Hmm.
So conciseness helps you to avoid the trap of speaking for the sake of killing silence, right?
Yes. And I think it, additionally to that is not using filler words and sounds. The most the clearest and most concise speakers, you won't hear them go in between saying something to fill the silence. They'll
Like
just
he's being limited.
lean into the silence
Yeah.
and leave a pause, often for dramatic effect.
Yeah.
When you leave a space between one point and another, it gives the other person the opportunity to process what you've just said.
That is very important,
Mm-hmm.
irrespective of the level of language that someone speaks. I think we need to start to pay a little bit more attention to that, that we're constantly telling each other stories, which generally means sharing of information. Information needs to be processed. So silence is key in being an effective communicator. And while we're on the subject of silence and conciseness, which is the second C, is simplify it for yourself internally. So what
Mhm.
I find, what a lot of, or at least some of the clients, what they struggle with is that they speak Italian, or you speak your native language, obviously at a level of a native, obviously. And now you are adding a second language to it. Now, as long as you are focusing on the words that you were saying, it means you are essentially trying to speak this new language that you're learning with the same level of complexity at which you speak your native. Now, remember, we've already said in the creativity video that most native English speakers don't know what you don't know. They also don't know what is complicated for you. So, with that, it's quite clear that you yourself are probably unaware of what is complex in your native language.
Mhm.
You can only be told that by someone who speaks your native language as a second language. So even for yourself, there are gaps in how much of depth or meaning or complexity there is in the way you speak your own language.
Mhm.
So that's, if you want to see how complex you speak in your own language, see how much difficulty you have translating what you think in your language into English. The more difficulty you have is probably a good sign that you probably speak your language at a very high level and probably in a complex manner. So what I say is the conciseness and simplicity starts with you, especially for people who are still stuck in that phase of thinking a lot in their own language and translating, which is absolutely quite normal. But you need to interpret your thoughts from your own language into English, which can be a little bit more complex. So a good starting place, I often say to them, is when, if you're still translating from English, from your own language into speaking to English, speak to yourself in your own language as if you were speaking to a child of your own language. Because the Italian or the French or the Spanish or the Chinese or the Swahili or whatever it is that you use to speak to your nephews, nieces, kids is a much simplified version of your own language. Now, if you insist on translating from English to Italian or from whatever to English, start constructing the phrases in your mind as if you're going to speak to a 5, 6, 7 year old in your native tongue.
Yeah.
And that, I think, helps you in simplifying the message and your wording and keeping it concise. Because children's attention span is like this. You need to get to the point, otherwise, ciao, as they say in Italian, which
Yeah.
basically means I forgot already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Agreed.
Sorry, I went
Agreed.
on a little bit long there on the long range. I'm
No,
sorry,
you're
rant
you're
almost.
exactly right. If you can't explain something complicated using language that a 5-year-old would understand, it's too complicated. All the best TED speakers in the world
Swear by this.
use that as their guide for how do I explain this complicated thing that I find very interesting to people that have never heard of me or my work before. Okay, how would I explain it to a 5-year-old? You use metaphor and story as a way to help people get into the mind of what you're talking about. It's so much easier to explain something when you simplify.
Yeah.
And then if someone understands, then you can start getting into more detail. You can start adding another layer of complication. But in the beginning, it's better overall, A, for your communication, but B, for rapport. If someone can understand clearly what you're saying in the shortest amount of time possible.
And C. I'll add A, B. You said A, B, and C.
Right.
Time. One, the resource that everyone wishes to have more of, time. I think people will appreciate it. And now maybe this is more in reference to business meetings, which is, for a lot of people, sometimes can be a bit of a pain. But
Right.
time, I think people will appreciate it more. It's
And
almost
and the
in a
higher up the
way,
ladder you get, the less time that person has to spend trying to understand what you're saying to them.
Exactly. Exactly. Thanks for watching part one of our two-part communications conversation. One of my favorite expressions in the English language is less is more. I hope that you'll have this idiomatic expression in mind the next time you've got to interact in English. Cheers for now. See you in part two.